Today is Tuesday, November 4th, 2025. This is Quick Start from CBN News. I'm Dan Andros. New Yorkers are preparing to flee the city after this election. We'll have that top story and more on today's podcast, where we bring you news from a Christian perspective. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating. Email us your thoughts as well. quickstartpodcast@cbn.org. We're glad you're here with us as we're getting through the news of the day each and every weekday, bright and early. And joining me here today to get through it all, CBN's Trey Goins-Phillips and Madison Seals. And Madison, on the focus story, Texas judges aren't going to face sanctions for turning down same-sex weddings anymore.
Yeah, officiating same-sex weddings is no longer a requirement for Texas judges who do weddings. And this could have implications on the challenge to Obergefell v. Hodges that legalized same-sex marriage in the first place. So we'll get into some of that for today's focus.
Yep, looking forward to the details there coming up in just a moment. Also, on the main thing, President Trump has put Nigeria back on the countries of particular concern list. How much work is there to still be done? Joel Veldkamp from Christian Solidarity International joined Billy for today's main thing. All right, make sure you're subscribing to all of our CBN News podcasts. As always, the links are right there in the description of this podcast episode. We put them in there every day for you. And also, you've got one more chance to see Oracles of God in theaters, the story of the New Testament from CBN Films. You get your tickets at cbnfilms.com. It's in theaters one more time tomorrow, November 5th. So get your tickets now, cbnfilms.com. All right, with that, we are going to head to the news now in 90 seconds. And nearly 1 million New Yorkers are saying they're going to leave if the Socialist wins. The new polls warning of a potential mass exodus from New York City if Zohran Mamdani wins the mayoral race today. Possibly the largest population flight in U.S. history, if that were to happen. Around 765,000 residents, about 10% of voters in New York say they'll definitely leave if he takes City Hall. Another 2 million plus said they'd consider it, many citing concerns about safety, taxes, and radical policies. High earners were especially wary, with 7% of those making over $250,000 a year saying they'd pack up for lower tax states like Florida, the Carolinas, and Tennessee. Mamdani currently holds a 6.5-point lead over former Governor Andrew Cuomo and continues to campaign on a far-left platform. And a Mississippi mom is going viral for shooting an escaped monkey to allegedly protect her kids. She says she had no choice but to open fire on an escaped monkey that had been terrorizing her neighborhood, fearing for her children's safety. The monkey reportedly broke free from a nearby home and began aggressively approaching people, even trying to enter the woman's property. And then this is I don't know if this is the same incident. I've seen two of these now. There was a truck of monkeys that overturned and these monkeys escaped. And I don't know if they were monkeys that were being experimented on or what was the case, but these monkeys were like running around and they couldn't find them. And these homeowners see them and they are afraid of these monkeys spreading diseases and whatnot, and they're shooting them. So just a wild story there. I mean, what are you guys going to do if a monkey just is roaming around in your backyard? I don't know that I'm going to shoot it, but I really hope I just don't have to find out, I guess, is the moral of the story here for me.
Yeah.
I'm definitely not going to shoot it just because I like animals too much and I don't want to have nightmares the rest of my life just dreaming and replaying in my head me shooting the monkey. So I think I would call animal control and then not watch whatever happens in the backyard. I also was, it was like just last week that I discovered, this is a completely random side note, but it is related to monkeys, that there are some monkeys that are native to parts of Florida. I don't know if either of you knew this. I just had no idea, but they were brought in like, I don't know, in the 50s or 60s from another country, and now they've just procreated, and now there are monkeys that are native to parts of Florida. So Anyway, it could happen if you're a listener living in Florida, I guess.
It could be on the lookout for monkeys.
Rabbit trail.
And they are horrible. They can be horrible. But I've heard this when my kids were asking, well, let's get a monkey. I was like, I don't know about this, guys. I mean, I was never seriously entertaining actually getting a monkey. But when you read about them, they can be absolutely horrible pets. I mean, just terrorizing your house, just ripping everything to shreds. Going to the bathroom on everything. They just don't care.
They're not the cleanest of creatures.
No, they just don't care. They're just tearing things up. So, I mean, Madison, what are you doing if a monkey strolls into your neighborhood here and is terrorizing your back patio?
Personally, I am not a big fan of monkeys. I completely avoid that whole exhibit at the zoo. I think they're smelly. I think they're very creepy, the way that they move and interact with people, just very aggressive. But I think it depends on the situation. Yeah, if it's not bothering anybody, it's roaming around in the backyard, I'm probably going to do what Trey said, call animal control. But if it's threatening my child, which it sounds like in some way this Mississippi mom apparently thought it was threatening her kids, I'm about to be a mom myself. And I imagine there's a little bit of motherly instinct that takes over, and you're going to try to protect your child from whatever danger you see roaming around. So I don't know. I tend to feel more for the mom or the human beings that act in these situations. Right. Like back in the whole Harambe era when people were freaking out about this gorilla being killed for hurting this child that fell into the exhibit. It was just really hard for me to relate to the people who were siding with the gorilla instead of the child, but this is a different situation. I think I feel for the mom here.
Right, 100%. And yes, Mama Bear Madison, if the monkey's there, she's running into the closet to get the shotgun. That's what we've learned from this. But yeah, no, I mean, I think, listen, as Christians, of course, you want to care for the animals in God's creation, but there is a hierarchy here, and we're made in the image of God. And again, you don't want to go out needlessly shooting animals, but at the same time, there is a priority here. And I think humanity can sometimes get that flipped and get it backwards and then really kind of humanize animals to a certain degree and try to get you to equate animals and humans. And that's why worldviews have consequences, because I guess if you're a secular atheist, we really aren't any different in their eyes to an animal. We're just farther along on the evolutionary chain. And so this is how you land in places like this where, oh, don't hurt this gorilla who's going to kill this child who fell into the pen, because they view them as equals. And so, worldviews have consequences, but let's just pray you don't have any monkeys roaming in your neighborhood, in your neck of the woods. But apparently trucks are carrying monkeys around and they're crashing and escaping. So I don't know if anyone's asking questions about that, but maybe we'll find out some more details down the road. But we're going to move on to the focus story now. And Texas judges aren't going to face sanctions for turning down same-sex weddings on religious grounds here. So Madison, what's the story here?
So last week, the Texas Supreme Court amended its judicial code of conduct to protect judges from being forced to perform same-sex weddings and facing disciplinary actions if they choose not to. And prior to this in Texas, judges were given an option to perform weddings or not. But if they did perform weddings, then they had to do both same-sex and then opposite sex weddings as well. That was kind of the law or the rule that was in place. And this amendment comes from a 2019 lawsuit that was filed by McLennan County Justice of the Peace Diane Hensley, who refused to marry same-sex couples because, as she said, it would be inconsistent with her religious faith. And at the time, the Commission on Judicial Conduct issued a public warning against her, saying that her refusal cast doubts on her impartiality as a judge. And for a while, Hensley just stopped performing all weddings. But on October 24th, the court approved adding a line to the Texas Code of Judicial Conduct that says it is not a violation of these canons for a judge to publicly refrain from performing a wedding ceremony based upon a sincerely held religious belief. And that change took effect immediately. So the second half of that is what's really important here, that Hensley's religious beliefs were protected, and that will also apply to all other judges who feel the same way.
And so what actions did Hensley take to fight for her religious freedom?
Well, back in December of 2019, Hensley sued the commission that issued the public warning against her under the Texas Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And she claimed that the warning burdened her free exercise of religion. And she'd asked for $10,000 in lost income from foregoing opposite sex weddings, plus attorney's fees. And even though lower courts dismissed the case in 2021, she finally did see justice in July of 2024 when the Texas Supreme Court reversed most of that judgment and ruled that her religious freedom claims were clearly sufficient under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act and allowed the lawsuit to proceed, which resulted in this win for Hensley and any other judges in the state whose religious beliefs prevent them from marrying a same-sex couple.
And so what bigger impact could this case play on the legalization of same-sex marriage?
Yeah, it could definitely have an impact on same-sex marriage nationwide. And we might be hearing more about this in the coming days or weeks because this is fairly new information. But when the U.S. Supreme Court case, Obergefell v. Hodges, legalized gay marriage nationwide back in 2015, it required judges and justices of the peace to either officiate both gay and straight marriages or none at all. So at first, that's why Hensley chose not to officiate any weddings following this decision, and then decided later to perform weddings again in 2016, but only for straight couples. But she did refer same-sex couples to a different judge and other nearby officiants. So it's not like people were not able to get legally married if they wanted to. But we know because of other cases like Jack Phillips that we've seen repeatedly, the Arlene's Flowers lawsuit, that getting legally married isn't enough for the LGBTQ agenda. That's not really what they're pushing. What they want is for everyone to be forced to accept this union and their belief of two same-sex individuals as right, even if you morally and spiritually disagree with that and don't see it as true union at all. So this is a huge win for Hensley and other Texas judges, but it's also a positive sign that the decision could potentially play a role in the federal lawsuit that's attempting to overturn Obergefell v. Hodges that legalized gay marriage in the first place. And I believe the court will actually decide whether to hear that challenge in just a few days on Friday.
Yeah, really interesting to see how that will play out. And look, as Christians, I mean, this is something that proponents of biblical marriage, the fact that you have to put same-sex marriage in front of it, like this qualifier, shows that it's not really what marriage actually is. It's just something different. And so the fact that they couldn't come up with a different name or make it a different institution, just like if you wanted to marry, like 10 people wanted to do some kind of group marriage or something, I think everyone would acknowledge that that is not like what a marriage is. A marriage is clearly over history, and in the Bible, one man, one woman, that's what marriage is. That's the definition of that. They have tried to change that. I really don't think you would have had, other than people lamenting, Christians lamenting kind of this trend in society, I don't know how much of an argument you would have had if you just named it something different and you said, there's this other thing over here that people are doing. The rub was, hey, you're taking something that is sacred to us as Christians and you're perverting it. And so that's where the complaints were. And so, the fact that had to go to court again to do this, is another whole issue there. But it is interesting to see that. I don't know if that's going to get back on the table again, I guess is where I was going with that. This whole conversation about same-sex marriage, and will it be relitigated or not? I don't know, but we'll see if this leads to it.
Yeah, it'd be surprising, I think, if this were to end up being relitigated, the case over quote-unquote same-sex marriage. But I totally agree with you. I think it's not actually marriage. That's the thing, right? I think marriage was already defined, as you just said, Dan. The Bible makes it clear it's God's institution. He created it. You can call it something else. In fact, we did call it something else. It was a same-sex union before we decided to legalize marriage. And I think we should have just left well enough alone. I think that's fine. You want to be in some sort of union that the government recognizes. But I know that argument is that ship has sailed on that argument. But it is possible, I guess, that if we get enough of these cases, it could be something ultimately that the Supreme Court, it ends up before the Supreme Court bench yet again. And we'll see if their decision were to change, because of course there's different justices now than there were when Obergefell came down in 2015. But either way, in the short term, in the immediate, this is a victory for sure for the true definition of marriage and for this judge.
Final thoughts, Madison?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it would be a shock to see it completely relitigated, but I wouldn't be surprised to see more cases like this pop up in other states when states recognize that their judges disagree with this. And there's a lot of them arguing for their religious freedom. And also that the state doesn't really take an interest in same-sex unions because there's not very many benefits to the state because of that. You know, when you have a married couple, a man and a woman, there's children involved. There's a lot of things that contribute to a healthy society. And that's one of the things that you don't get with a same-sex union. And another reason that it should be called something different because it is something completely different. It's not a true marriage and shouldn't be blessed as such.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, appreciate you bringing that story to the podcast today, Madison. And we're going to head to the main thing now. Joel Veldkamp, head of international communications at Christian Solidarity International, is speaking out about President Donald Trump's decision to designate Nigeria as a country of particular concern, a label that could help put pressure on the Nigerian government to help protect Christians who are under duress. He joined Billy for today's main thing.
Joel Veldkamp, a lot to discuss on Nigeria. You and I have talked about this issue many times before. The slaughter of Christians across that nation. This has been a dire problem for a long time. And for years now, we've talked about whether or not Nigeria should be redesignated a country of particular concern by the U.S. State Department. This was something that was done under the first Trump administration. The Biden administration removed Nigeria from that list. President Donald Trump has once again designated Nigeria a country of particular concern. Let's start there. For those who don't know what that means, what is that designation?
Sure. So there's a law from 1998 called the International Religious Freedom Act that requires the U.S. government to maintain a list of countries that commit or tolerate severe violations of religious freedom. And once a country is on that list, the U.S. government is required to address those violations of religious freedom, including by economic sanctions if necessary. Sadly, this list is quite political. There are many countries that deserve to be on it that aren't. And it doesn't really amount to very much in terms of enforcement. But one of the most egregious omissions from this list for years, as you mentioned, has been Nigeria. Nigeria is the deadliest place in the world to be a Christian. More Christians are killed in Nigeria for their faith every year than in the rest of the world combined. And yet somehow Nigeria is not on this list. As the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom said, this is unexplainable. So it's a long overdue step that the president has put it back on the list. And now we're looking to see what he'll do about it.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't just designating Nigeria. He put out a fairly strong worded statement about not ruling out military activity, U.S. military activity, boots on the ground, essentially saying that the U.S. was going to take action, pulling aid from Nigeria. What did you make when you saw the statement, not just the designation, the statement? What were you thinking?
I really wanted to know what the policy process was behind the statement. The statement is a statement. But there really needs to be some follow through. And right now, the Nigerian government is very worried about this. And that's a positive thing. I was just talking to my Nigerian colleague about an hour ago, and he said, people in Nigeria are very upset about this. The government is on its toes. They're looking for a way out. That's a positive situation. That's a situation in which there's a potential for good change. But there has to be some kind of follow through. And what my concern about the talk about military action is that the U.S. has already been involved in military action in Nigeria for a while. All the way back to 2014, the U.S. sent troops to help the Nigerian military fight Boko Haram and other jihadist groups. And that has never really stopped. The U.S. has standing military operations in a lot of West Africa. So when he talks about using military force, is he just going to bomb Boko Haram a few times? Because that is not going to solve the problem. And in fact, Boko Haram, this really in-your-face jihadist group that's always publishing horrifying videos and waves black flags everywhere, they are not the main problem these days. They make a lot of noise, but the real groups that are actually destroying Christian communities in Nigeria's Middle Belt region are Fulani militias that are conducting a slow-motion ethnic cleansing campaign, attacking Christian village after Christian village, killing whoever they find, driving people out, burning the village or occupying it. And slowly with time, we're seeing the map transform. And all these hundreds of old Christian villages are now gone and occupied by new people. That is happening because almost certainly there's some connivance with figures inside the Nigerian security state. And we're not going to bomb our way out of that problem. The U.S. has to really engage with the Nigerian government, make it clear that they have to put an end to this. And if they need our help putting an end to this, we can help. But the call is coming from inside the house, and the Nigerian government has to do something about it. That has to be the thrust of U.S. policy here if we're actually going to protect Christians in Nigeria.
Yeah, I mean, this is a situation, too, where nearly half of the country is Christian, right? And so you have, and in other places, you're talking about very small numbers of Christians. This is not the case there. And you just detailed what is happening, obviously. When you look at this situation, it is so horrifying. And yet there's this media narrative, too, that I feel like is popping up after Trump's statement. And we're seeing people say, well, there's no evidence that Christians are being killed more than Muslims. We don't see that, any evidence for that. You know, Christian Solidarity International and many other groups have been talking about this for a long time and talking about the Christian persecution aspect. How do you respond when you see the media saying, oh, no, we don't know that Christians are being targeted?
I would say there's two cases here. There's Boko Haram and the jihadists who say, we target Christians. That's our goal. Our goal is to destroy Christianity in Nigeria and set up an Islamic state. That's one group. The other group is these Fulani militias who are very quiet, who don't make a lot of noise on the international scene, who are simply attacking. And in the Middle Belt region, in central Nigeria, places like Plateau State, Kaduna State, Benue State, it is almost exclusively Christian villages that are being attacked. There are other parts of Nigeria, like the Northwest, where there's a lot of insecurity. The government doesn't have a lot of presence on the ground. And yeah, there's a lot of violence between the people who live there, who are almost all Muslim to begin with. And that is a problem of insecurity and poverty and general absence of government structures. But in the Middle Belt, it's very clear what's happening. The Christian presence is being targeted. There is a program to get rid of them as a group. And so it's too simple to say, well, Muslims are being killed too. Of course they are. And it's a huge human tragedy. And everyone in Nigeria will be better off when this problem comes to an end. But it is senseless to deny that Christians are being targeted. They are.
Yeah. And okay, now Trump put out this statement. If you had Donald Trump in front of you right now, you talked about policy. What would your recommendation be for what the U.S. needs to do to help ease this? You gave a little bit of that, but you know, if he was just like, what are the points I need to follow right now to you've looked at this more than almost anybody to fix this problem?
Yeah, I would say this needs sustained engagement from the U.S. So it would be good if there was someone like a Nigeria czar who reports directly to the president or perhaps to the Secretary of State, who is authorized to speak with Nigerian government officials and to make promises and to make threats, basically say, we need to see fewer attacks in this region. Tell us what you need to accomplish that. But if the attacks continue, there are going to be penalties. There are going to be aid cutoffs. There are going to be fewer invitations to security conferences. There are going to be real consequences for you and your people. So there isn't a silver bullet here. We need a sustained engagement from the Trump administration on this issue. We need to track how many attacks are happening over time, make sure that fewer are happening. And if the trend lines are going in the wrong direction, then yeah, there need to be consequences for the Nigerian government. Maybe I can add one other thing, because Senator Cruz has a bill in Congress right now called the Nigerian Religious Freedom Act, if I'm not mistaken. And that bill points to something very important, which is that in 12 states in Nigeria, Sharia law is the law of the land. And this is in flagrant contradiction to the Nigerian constitution itself, which demands secularism. But in these 12 states, Sharia courts operate. Christians and others are tried and put in prison for blasphemy against Islam. And it's in these states where you see a lot of violence against Christians. So there is almost a government stamp of approval for this Muslim supremacism that engenders violence against Christians. And that also really has to be addressed.
Well, Joel, I appreciate that you have tackled all of this today, helped us understand it better, and we'll continue to track with you on this because I think there are going to be more developments, obviously, on Nigeria. I think this is just the beginning of this conversation of what the U.S. is probably going to do moving forward. I can't imagine there won't be more, but we'll have to wait and see, and we'll continue tracking. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Billy.
All right, appreciate that conversation there, Billy. And that's going to leave us with time for one last thing on the podcast today. And we are going to look at Matthew 19, verses 4, 5, and 6. And he answered them. This is Jesus answered, "Have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let no man separate." There's Jesus backing up what is said in the Old Testament about marriage.
Yeah, I think it's a great reminder of what God's institution is and how we ought to be, as the church and Christians, we ought to be protecting and reinforcing what God designed.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially in the confusion of today. This is such a simple truth, and it's good and beautiful, and we have that to rely on and stand on as believers.
Amen. And yeah, people I think are crying out for simple truths these days in the face of a whole bunch of lies being just spewed each and every day, all over the place on a whole lot of things. So always good to go back to scripture and go back to the truth. That's where we're going to leave it for today's podcast. As always, get on over to cbnnews.com, faithwire.com for more news from a Christian perspective. God bless. See you back here tomorrow.